Sixth grade, welcome to our final lesson on Chapter 1. Yesterday we were talking a lot about, as we look at history and we look for evidence, and then we try to interpret that evidence to try to draw conclusions, make inferences. We have to make sure we see everything from multiple points of view and not let personal bias come in there and cloud our judgments or let our emotions get in the way of seeing something from a different side. And then the constant review of those conclusions that we've drawn. What historians are doing is always looking for new evidence, always looking to see if what they think is still true and accurate depending on what's being found. We also spent a little time yesterday talking about the differences between primary sources and secondary sources. Primary means they happened at the time of the event, so eyewitnesses such as diaries, photographs, pictures, cave art, things like that. Secondary sources are written later using primary sources. Lots of times we think secondary sources are pretty good because it's going to use multiple primary sources, but we obviously need the primary sources. We need witnesses to do that. Today what we're going to do in lesson 3 is we're going to talk about researching history. So when you have to start writing history projects, especially as you get older, you're going to do more and more papers and projects that go along with that. So today they're just going to introduce you on what that looks like, how to take that on, and how to do those things. If you have your book open, you're on page 18. You should have your note page with you to fill in those blanks as we go through it. If you've logged in online, you'll be following along the same way I'm following along. Lesson 3 is talking research and history. The essential question at the top says, how do you research history? And it matters because knowing where to find information about your subject will make it easier to complete research projects and other schoolwork. So in general, this is good for all kinds of things, how to find the information that you need, and then specifically as you have to do research projects, especially as you get older. We'll get started on planning your project. It says the first step in a history research project is to identify your topic. A topic should not be too broad. In other words, I'm not going to do a research project on the Middle Ages because there's way too much information out there. It also shouldn't be too narrow. Their example is Middlebury, England in 1535. So there's probably not enough information about the little town there that would make for a fun research project. So how do I know if I got the right size? It says to test your topic, try to look it up in an encyclopedia. If there is no entry for your topic, then it's too small. So if I went to an encyclopedia, I might not find anything on Middlebury, England in 1535. If there are many entries or very long entries, then your topic may be too large. Selecting a topic that is workable is the most important part of the project. So coming up with what I need to work on. Lots of times in your classes, your teacher will tell you that, like, hey, I want you to do a research report on the Battle of Gettysburg. Well, then you know exactly what your topic is. But sometimes they let the students decide and you just don't want it to get too big. If I was doing a research project on World War II, there's just way too much information about World War II, so I probably want a specific battle. Next paragraph, after you choose a topic, you need to decide what you want to learn about it. So they say create the 6 questions to help you find out who, what, when, where, why, and how. Then write each question on the top of a note card. These cards will become your research tools. You may need to add additional cards as you do the research. So as I start to think about what I want to know, or who the important people were, or where did it take place, or when did it take place, I write down my when card, and then I do my research and I find, hey, when did the Battle of Gettysburg actually happen? And when I get the answer, I write that on that note card, and then I have that answered as I start to make my way through my research. Continuing on, next section. After selecting a topic and creating your question cards, the next step is to gather your research materials. Begin with general reference books such as encyclopedias and textbooks, or your notes from class. Next, try looking for books about your subject at the library. Your research material must be nonfiction rather than fiction or persuasive writings or opinions. In other words, you have to get something that's accurate. I can't use a fiction book which tells a great story, but it's not true in history. So make sure it's nonfiction. As you're cruising along with there, you're down with numbers 1, 2, and 3 on your notes, just making sure you're keeping up. Next important skill, distinguishing fact from opinion. Scan each possible source to determine if the source is trustworthy. Look for opinion statements in the text. This will give you a clue that a resource could be biased or untrustworthy. Remember, a statement of fact expresses only what can be proven by evidence. A statement of opinion expresses an attitude. It is a conclusion or judgment about something that cannot be proven true or false. Historical research should rely on facts and primary sources rather than opinions. So that skill is really good. You will see opinions, guys. It's not that they're wrong. Drawing a conclusion is my opinion of what is true based on evidence. And lots of times historians have to do that because we don't have the definite answer to that. But what we want to do is say, hey, was your opinion based on good evidence or not? If it's based on logical evidence, that's a fine thing to be using. And we'll see that, and I'll point that out to you as we start to get into these chapters. You'll see that a lot of times our history book will write, this may be this, or this could be this. Okay, that's saying this is our opinion, and here's why we believe what we believe with it. Going on to the next page, as we start making our notes, it says, as you find information, make a note about it on your cards. Your notes should be in your own words and incomplete sentences. On the back of each card, make notes about the books in which you found the information. So lots of times when you're doing this research, you're looking through books, you get a piece of information, you write the sentence down that you like. They keep telling you to put it in your own words. We'll talk more and more of why we put it in our own words, so that it's actually my research paper, but then also make a note of the page in the book it was found on. Lots of times, especially as you get older, like I think about a lot of the papers I wrote in college, they would literally on the first day of school assign you the research paper and say, this semester I want you to do this big huge research paper on a topic and have it done by the end of the semester. And you're like, okay, I got 3 months. Well, you can't check out a book at the library for that long. So you go to the library and try to answer a few questions each week and then take those notes down. So if you ever had to go back to the book that you turned back into the library, you could do that and find that information real quick. Okay, now they've been talking about books and library a lot. The next section is going to talk about using the internet. Obviously, the internet is awesome. Tons of information, and they're going to tell you the pros and the cons, the good things and the bad things about it. Looking for information on the internet is quick and rewarding. However, it can be a challenge to find out if the information that you located is true. Good historians follow a few important guidelines as they gather information. Number one, authorship. Many articles on the internet are unsigned. A reader has no way of knowing who wrote the content or whether the author is an expert on the subject. However, reliable articles will be signed by well-known experts on the subject. The authors will include details about their credentials. Credentials is evidence they are an expert. So if you want credentials, lots of times we'll say, okay, how do you feel about certain medicines? Well, if I write an article and say, I like this medicine, that's meaningless. I'm not an expert on medicine. I'm not a doctor. I have no credentials for that. If the next article you read that talks about that medicine has a person that has a PhD behind their name, in other words, they're a doctor of medicine, you might say, hey, I can believe this person. He has the credentials about what he's talking about. And I think that's really important. Lots of times we have people giving their opinions on things, but they're not experts in that field. So we want to make sure they have experts in their field. And you got to be careful on the internet because anybody can do anything. Lots of times when you're doing a research paper at your level, you go to Wikipedia. Well, on Wikipedia is an entry by me. When I was in college, one of the classes we took, we had to make up a Wikipedia entry. Now, it's accurate. I mean, I took it out of my textbook, but I'm by no means an expert, and anybody can post things to Wikipedia. So I need to know those things when I look out there. Just because it's on a certain site doesn't mean it's there. So step one, I want to know who wrote it and if they are known to be an expert in their field. Continuing on, it says there are other ways to decide if an article is worth using for research. You can look at the home page for the article. If the article is on a site of university, government office, or museum, it's most likely reliable. For example, suppose you find a signed article about the foods eaten by American colonists and you find that the article is published by the academic journal at a university. You can assume that this page is a better source than an unsigned article about the same subject by a blogger on a cooking website. What they're getting at there is the university has a reputation on the line. What they have posted and is tied to their name, they want to be accurate. So they're going to do some background checking before they put an article out there. And so there's a lot to go with that. Anybody can post stuff all over the place. What they're saying is if you're doing a research article, following a blog site or things like that, not too good of an idea. Now there's some helpful hints to know if it's good or not, and that's using URLs. A URL stands for a Uniform Resource Locator, or the URL. You and I probably call it a website. It is the address of an online resource. The ending of the URL tells a great deal about the content. A URL that ends in .gov is from a government entity. This site probably contains accurate data. This data is usually as up-to-date as possible. In other words, the government wants to give you true information. So if it ends in .gov, you should be able to trust it and it should be up to date. Second paragraph, a URL that ends in .edu is usually from an educational institution such as a college or university. Most edu sites pride themselves on accuracy. However, it is possible that documents on these sites may contain opinions in addition to facts. That's true of a lot of things, guys. So they're saying, hey, EDU is probably a good thing to trust because the reputation's on the line. It's most likely been checked. But lots of times students will be able to post on there, and students might have just simply giving their opinion. And some of that times it's okay. If I am in political science, okay, political science is giving my opinion on what I think is best. So I'm going to read an article, and it's all opinions. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means I need to know that this is an opinion. I can't use it as part of my research paper, but lots of times when people give their opinion, they back it up with some facts on here's why I have this opinion. So I can find those facts that they used for their opinion and say, hey, this is great to be able to use that. But they give you a word of caution. Paragraph number 3. Nonprofit organizations usually use .org at the end of their URLs. These sites may be accurate. However, these groups often gather information to support their cause. Their sites may contain biased information as they often contain opinions. Okay, your school website is a .org. We're an organization, okay, so because we are a nonprofit. So what they said there is definitely true of us. We're going to give you information based on God's word. Now people are going to say that might be biased because it's Christian and from a Christian point of view. Absolutely, okay? And so we need to understand that a lot of the times when you're at a .org, you're coming from an organization. So if I'm at the American Heart Association.org, they're going to talk all about how to keep my heart healthy so that I exercise and do those things. Why? Because that's what they're passionate about. And we simply need to understand those things so I can use certain websites. The last paragraph. You have gathered information and answered the questions on your note cards. Next, organize your cards into categories. So all the wins, all the wheres, all the whos, you put those all together. Once your cards are sorted, you can use them as an outline for writing your research paper. In other words, what am I going to do? I'm going to start out at who am I talking about? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And as I put those cards in order, that gives me my outline, and then that's going to lead to the paper that I'm going to write to make it flow. Now the challenges. Back from yesterday talking about bias. You have chosen a good topic, you've created your question cards, you've used them while reading encyclopedia articles and library books, you've also used your cards while reviewing reliable internet resources about your topic, you've turned the answers on your question cards into an outline. Now you're ready to write your research paper. As you work, be aware of some very important guidelines for writing about history. Number 1, to plagiarize is to present the ideas or words of another person as your own without offering credit to the source. So if I click the little picture up here, guys, that's the little joke. I didn't write the book report. I downloaded it and printed it directly from the internet, but I did, put it together, collate, and staple it myself. Okay, that kid is saying, I plagiarized. The older you get, the more you need to understand you can't take words directly out of a book and not give credit to somebody for that. So they'll tell you how to do that. Plagiarism is similar to forgery or copying something that is not yours. It also violates copyright laws in America. In other words, if I wrote a book because I want people to buy my book and make money. If you then take things out of my book and put them in your book and sell it for money, you violated copyright laws. You're preventing me from making the money. In fact, you're making money off of my words. That's why it's illegal. That's why we have laws for it. These laws prevent the unauthorized use of a writer's work. If you copy an idea or a written text exactly word for word, that's plagiarism. That's wrong. Some scholars have ruined their careers through plagiarism. They use content from books or the internet without citing the source or giving credit. Here's how you avoid plagiarism. Follow these rules. Rule number 1, simply take the information you read and put it into your own words. So if I'm writing a research paper on the dates for the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, I can copy those right out of a book because somebody doesn't own those words. That's just a historical fact that the Battle of Gettysburg was fought in July of 1863, okay? But when I start to talk about how I feel about those things, I don't want to quote somebody word for word. I want to put into my own words. Number 2, when you restate an opinion from something you read, just simply reference that. So according to Smith and Jones, the author of the book, it said the Battle of Gettysburg was the most important battle in the Civil War. Okay, that's an opinion, and I told them right in my research paper that I'm quoting these authors. That's not plagiarism. I gave credit to the authors who wrote that book. Number 3, always include a footnote when you use a direct quotation from one of your sources. So in other words, in my research paper, I wrote down, Smith and Jones said on page 7 that the Gettysburg did this, 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 and this, and I quoted 2 sentences right out of their book. I write that right into my research paper, but then at the bottom of the page I put a footnote, which would say, from page 7 on Smith and Jones' book entitled The Battle of Gettysburg. So that's not wrong for me to use a book word for word because I gave credit to those people. I'm saying these aren't my words. These are somebody else's words. And that's how you protect yourself from plagiarism as you work your way through that. Okay, last paragraph, really important as we work our way through this history book. It says, avoid using modern ideas to evaluate a historical event. For example, a scholar of women's history may want to apply modern ideas to women's rights in historical settings. Ideas have changed over time. Drawing conclusions about women's attitudes in the Middle Ages using modern ideas would be a mistake. Your evaluations of history should be based on evidence, not on today's understandings of rights and society. So your history book just gave you one example. It's women's rights. It's a great example for us. As we read this history book, you're going to see time and time again that in ancient civilizations, women didn't have a whole lot of rights. Now today that bothers us because in America, we believe in equal rights for all people. Men, women, the same. But you can't be offended when you read in ancient times that it wasn't the same, because that's just not how it was in ancient times. The other thing we're going to struggle with in our history book is time and time again in ancient civilizations, they had slavery. Now in America, we abolished slavery 150 years ago, and we don't think slavery is a good idea. But I can't pass judgment on ancient people to say, I can't believe you had slavery, because in ancient times that was acceptable. And so what they're giving you the encouragement here at the end is by saying, hey, don't let how you feel in modern times go back and say, I didn't like those people. Why? Well, because they did things that are different than America. We'll see that time and time again, and they're giving you a good challenge to say, I gotta shut my point of view down because I don't agree with what they did in that time, but at that time it might have been acceptable. And as we read this book, we're going to see a lot of those things. So it's a good challenge for us, guys. It's one of the ways we've learned from the past to be able to do those things as we work our way through that. Try not to get angry with civilizations that might not operate the way we think they should operate today. That brings you to the end of lesson 3. Hopefully you got all those notes filled in as we went, and you have that little worksheet. Take your time with that worksheet. Make sure you got your answers correct because there's not too many of them. And then because lesson 3 is the last one of a chapter, tomorrow we'll have a test. Remember on your test, if you want, you can feel free to use your book. You could feel free to use your notes. You could feel free to use past worksheets that are sitting in your folders right now. Just make sure that those notes and worksheets get back in the correct day. Blessings.